All right, so the first thing we're going to do is talking about, like, this right here is a cubic equation, yes? What you want to be able to do is solve the cubic equation. You want to be able to factor it. You cannot factor a lot of cubic equations, but there are special cases, and we're going to learn about two of those today, okay? Well, maybe just one of them, we'll maybe do the other one on Monday, okay? So write down that, well, they are. Write down that equation right quick, or that function, I should say. Huh? Okay. So guys, a lot of you, when you learned factoring, did any of you learn factoring by grouping? Sorry, those of you that are listening to the video, but right now I'm staring at people that don't even have their notes in front of them when I asked them a while ago to get those out. I hope that's not you. Okay, so I've got x cubed minus 4x squared plus 16x minus 64, and I want to know, can I find the zeros of this just by factoring or looking at the function and figuring it out, okay? What I know is that grouping, and this only works if specific conditions are met. There's four terms. If I were to try to solve this, so rewrite it, but this time set it equal to 0. Okay? And it's called factor by grouping because at this point, what do we do? Do any of you remember factor by grouping? Okay. So what you do is you group the first two with a parenthesis. Now this is a plus sign, right? What you don't want to do is put a parenthesis right here, which implies multiplication. This is not multiplication, but I want to group, so I'm going to put the parentheses around the 16x minus 64. All I've done is put parentheses, meaning I've grouped the terms. I haven't changed it, right? But here's what I notice. What do these two terms have in common? So factor it out. X squared, what am I left with? An x minus 4. Close parentheses. Now, with 16x and 64, what do they have in common? Well, if you're not sure, definitely check 16. Because what I need to happen is that when whatever I factor out here, I need it to look like x minus 4 when I'm done. So if you check, 64 divided by 16 is 4, so I'm going to factor out a 16. If I factor out a 16, what am I left with? X minus 4, and then equals 0, right? Okay. Now guys, when you factor something, you take it out and put parentheses around it, right? So if I were factoring this equation, x squared times 3 plus 16 times 3, could I factor a 3 out and leave left with x squared plus 16? Y'all cool with that? If you have something in common in both terms, can you factor it out? What do we have common in both of these terms? They're both multiplied by an x minus 4, right? So what we do is we factor out the x minus 4, and what are we left with when you factor it out? X squared plus 16 equals 0. Now, do you have to think of it as factoring out, or can you just like say, well, once I get here, that is one of them, and then what I'm left over with is the other one? You can just do that. But right here, can I solve? Can I solve for when this equals 0? When does x minus 4 equal 0? When x equals 4. So 4 is one of my solutions. I know that this function crosses the x-axis at 4. Now what about x squared plus 16? Okay, so here's what I need to do. I'm going to write x squared plus 16, and I'm going to set it equal to 0. How do you solve? Subtract 16. So x squared equals a negative 16. And then do what? Take the square root. When you take the square root, how many answers are there? So don't forget, plus and minus the square root of negative 16. What's the square root of 16? What's the square root of negative 16? Plus and minus 4i. So you've actually got 3 zeros for this equation. 4 and then plus and minus 4i. So if you were to graph this, how many times would it cross the x-axis? It would only cross it once, because what are these? They're imaginary numbers, which means you're not going to see them. Okay, so this is one of those situations where you're going to have a cubic, kind of like that one that you had on the homework, and it looks something, well, let's go across at negative 64, so it would do something like that. It's a cubic, but it's only got one real root, okay? All right, let's do the next one. So I'll give you a second to write this down. X cubed plus 2x squared minus 4x minus 8. X cubed plus 2x squared minus 4x minus 8. Okay, so again, I'm going to rewrite it and set it equal to 0. You don't have to do this step. I just like to go ahead. Okay, I'm actually going to write it out to the side as well, because I've got something I want to address with you. That's 2x squared minus 4x minus 8. Let's talk about how to properly group this. Group the first two. That's pretty easy, right? Around the first two terms. Group them around the first two. Okay, over here I'm going to show you what you can have an issue with if you end up doing. If you group it like this, and you put the parenthesis right there, what does that do with that negative now? It distributes it. You've actually changed the equation, because that makes that a positive 8. So you can't do that, which means I need to take the negative with the 4, right? But then what does that look like? Multiplication, which we said we're not doing, right? So instead of saying 2 minus 7, can I say 2 plus a negative 7? Is that the same thing? Yeah? So when you have to take the negative with it, just put a plus sign in between them. Okay? When you have to take the negative with it, just put a plus sign in between them. Okay. So group and factor. What can we factor out of the first two? X squared. What am I left with? I'm left with 1x plus 2. Okay, this is only going to work if you get the same thing twice. So see this x minus 4 and x minus 4? I need an x plus 2 right here. They're both negative, right? So do I need to factor out the negative with the 4? Yeah. So let's factor out a negative 4. What am I left with? Hopefully x plus 2. Negative 4 divided by negative 4 is 1, so x. Negative 8 divided by negative 4 is positive 2 equals 0. At this point, you can either think of factoring it out, or you can just write down what you know is going to happen. It's going to be what times what? X plus 2 times x squared minus 4, and that equals 0. Do I care what order you put these in? Can you put x squared minus 4 first? Sure, it doesn't really matter, okay? It's just multiplication. What do you got to do now? What do you got to do now? You got to solve, right? What does that equal 0? When x equals negative 2. X squared minus 4. Now, guys, x squared plus 4 or plus 16 is not a difference of perfect squares. It doesn't factor. Well, it does, but they're imaginary. Does x squared minus 4 factor? So you can either work at one or two ways. You can either say, I know that's x plus 2 and x minus 2, right? So I might as well just say negative 2 and positive 2. Or you could set it equal to 0 and solve. Add the 4 over, take the square root. Plus and minus the square root of 4 is plus and minus 2. Okay? Either way, you get that you have what zeros? 2 and negative 2. Why don't I write down negative 2 twice? It's there twice, right? Does that actually mean something, the fact that it's there twice? Can you cross the x-axis twice at negative 2? You actually can't. Yeah, make a loop-de-loop. Just go to it and then come back to it? Yeah. Okay, no. That's a big no. But let's talk about this. I'm just going to show you something, and we'll talk more about this later. But what does minus 3 on the inside of a function do? Good. What does minus 3 on the inside of a function do? Y'all remember transformations? Shifts it to the right 3. What does x squared look like? A parabola shifted to the right 3. X minus 3 times x minus 3, isn't that what we're dealing with here? X plus 2 and then another x plus 2. So it actually doesn't cross the x-axis. What does it do on the x-axis? Kind of sits on it. It bounces off of it, right? Comes down to it and then hits it and then goes back up, right? Okay, we'll talk more about that later, but that is technically what's happening. So if negative 2 is on there twice, go ahead and put m2 at the end of negative 2. And we'll talk more about that later, but what that stands for is multiplicity 2, because there's 2 of them. Okay? So your answers are 2 and then negative 2 with a multiplicity of 2. All right, let's do another one. Okay, 7x cubed plus 21x squared minus 3x plus 9. So 7x cubed minus 21x squared minus 3x plus 9. I'm just going to mark that out and put equals 0. Okay, what do I start doing? Grouping. Group the first two. Where do I put the parenthesis? Before or after the negative? Before the negative, what do I put in between them? Plus sign, and then at the end. Okay, tell me what I can do. 7x squared. Okay, what am I left with? X minus 3. So if I factor out a 7x squared, I'm left with x minus 3. What are you going to need to factor out of negative 3x plus 9 to make it x minus 3? The negative 3. So I'm going to factor out a negative 3, and I'm left with x minus 3 equals 0. Is this guaranteed to always work? On your homework, yeah, because I'm testing you on this. But if you got a cubic equation with 4 terms, can you always factor by grouping? No. If these numbers don't have anything in common, then you can't do anything. Okay? So, what are we left with? X minus 3 and? Good. X minus 3 and 7x squared minus 3. This one's easy. What makes that 0? Positive 3. Now let's talk 7x squared minus 3 equals 0. What are you going to do? I'm going to add the 3. Divide by 7. I don't know why I wrote that stuff down, but oh well. X squared equals 3/7. How do you get rid of a square? How many answers do you have when you take a square root? So x equals plus and minus the square root of 3/7. And x equals 3. Okay, just as a quick what if you got plus and minus the square root of 7/4? Just kidding, that wasn't even visible. What if you got that? Can you take the square root of 7? Can you take the square root of 4? So maybe plus and minus the square root of 7 over 2. What if you got plus and minus the square root of 4/7? Can you take the square root of 4? And that would be plus and minus 2 over the square root of 7. Do I like square roots in the denominator? So what would you do? You rationalize, you multiply by the square root of 7 on top of bottom. Perfect. So I would be left with plus and minus 2 root 7 over what? 7. Okay? Yep, they do not. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do quadratic form. So that was grouping, okay? If you've got 4 terms, you've got a cubic, and these two have the same thing in common that these two, then you can factor it out. Well, not the same thing in common, but what you're left with after you factor them out. Then you can do that. The first thing actually on your homework is sum and difference of perfect cubes. We're going to skip that and do that on Monday. So what we're going to do is do quadratic form. Okay. So write down, what we're doing is non-quadratic functions, but in quadratic form. Okay? So write down y equals x to the fourth minus 3x squared minus 70. Okay. When I'm looking at this right here, this looks very similar to this. And if I asked you to solve this, what would you do? You would factor it, right? What is this factors? What are the factors of negative 70 that add up to negative 3? Negative 10, positive 7. So maybe you would write x minus 10 and x plus 7 and set equals 0. The answer would be positive 10 and positive, or negative 7. Okay. No big deal, right? Okay. What if I squared that and I squared that? What's that now? That's x to the fourth, and this is x squared. So here's what happens. This is x squared, and that is now, oop, I totally just took that out of your sight. That's x squared, and now this is x to the fourth. Okay, well when this was x squared and that was x, this was just x. Well, when this is x squared and that's x to the fourth, it's still minus 10 plus 7. But instead of doing x right here, what do we put? X squared. So as long as this is half of that, or this is double that, it's in a quadratic form. And let's multiply that and make sure it works. What's x squared times x squared? X to the fourth. X squared times 7, and then negative 10 times x squared. So you got 7x squared minus 10x squared. That is negative 3x squared, and then negative 70. So we're good, right? Okay, but that means we're actually solving this right here. So x squared minus 10 equals 0. X squared plus 7 equals 0. Write those down. We need to solve. How do I solve the first one? Add 10, and then do what? All right, so x equals plus and minus the square root of 10. Those are two of my answers. What about the other one? Subtract the 7, so what does x equal? Plus and minus the square root of 7, I. Two real, two imaginary. On your homework, you had a problem that looked like this. That's a quartic, right? Is that the quadratic form? Yeah, which means two answers were real. They were probably irrational, like square roots of something, and then two answers were imaginary, which is why it only crossed twice. Okay? Okay. So let's do this one. X to the fourth plus 15x squared plus 54. X to the fourth plus 15x squared plus 54. Can we factor? We're looking for factors of 54 that add up to 15. 6 and 9. Y'all good with that? So what do I put in here? Instead of x, we just put x squared. Whatever that is, whatever that number right there is, that is what goes there. Okay? As long as that is double that. Okay, so x squared plus 6 equals 0, x squared plus 9 equals 0. You can do this in your head. What are you going to do right there? Subtract 6 and then Take the square root. What's the square root of negative 6? Square root of 6i. How many answers? Plus and minus the square root of 6i. Some people like to put the I right there. I don't really care. Okay, either one is correct. Just, you know what you don't do? Don't do that. Why not that one? If you put the I underneath the square root, that's like the square root of the square root of negative 1. We're not doing that. Okay, so what about this one? Subtract 9 and then take the square root. What's the square root of negative 9? 3i. So plus and minus 3i. Okay. Let's do this one. X to the 6 plus 6x cubed plus 8. X to the 6 plus 6x cubed plus 8. Okay. Is this exactly the same thing as it was before? No, but is x to the 6 x cubed squared? Is that x to the 6th? Then it works the same way. When I factor, what's going to go right here? X cubed. So we just need to factor. What are the factors of 8 that add up to 6? 4 and 2. Plus 4 plus 2. Okay, so if I want to solve this, I'm going to subtract 4. X cubed equals negative 4. How do you get rid of a cube? You take the cubed root. How many answers are there when you take a cubed root? When you take a square root, there's 2 answers, plus and minus. But when you take a cubed root, there's only 1. Because if you think about, like, squaring, when does x squared equal 25? Well, when x equals 5 and when x equals negative 5, because both of them squared equal 25, right? But when x cubed equals 8, that can only be 2, because what's negative 2 cubed? Negative 8. Yeah? Y'all with me? What are we doing? Are you good? What are you doing? I don't either. So don't play poker. Okay? Okay. So there's only one answer, and it's the cubed root of negative 4 for that one. Do I have to put an I when you take the cubed root? No, it's just the cubed root of negative 4. Could you say negative cubed root of 4? Are those the same thing? They are actually the same thing. So, because if you think about the cubed root of negative 8, isn't that just negative 2? Which same thing as saying negative cubed root of 8. So, either way, it doesn't really matter. What about this one? If x cubed equals negative 2, then what does x equal? Cubed root of negative 2. So you've only got 2 roots. Okay. I think we've got 2 more. This one and then the last one. Okay? It gets so much harder. 2 more total that we're doing today. This included. As long as this number, this power 10, is double that power 5, it's the quadratic form. Okay? So I'm looking for the factors of what? That add up to? So what are you thinking? Because some people might say that, and some people might say that. Which one is it? Right, because otherwise, when you multiply these, you get a positive 6, right? And you need negative. So, positive 1, negative 6, what goes here? X to the 5th. Alright, then we just solve x to the 5th plus 1 equals 0. What do? Subtract the 1 and take the what? What's the 5th root of negative 1? It's just negative 1. Because negative 1 times negative 1 times negative 1 times negative 1 times negative 1 is negative 1. Alright. X to the 5th minus 6 equals 0. Add the 6. And what? Take the 5th root. So I got 5th root of 6 and negative 1. These are going to be pretty small numbers because otherwise, like if you look over at your power chart over there on the whiteboard, like if you look at 5th roots, the 4 to the 5th is 1024. So if this is 1024, then those would have to be some really large numbers that you're factoring with, and I'm not going to have you do that. That's just no point. All right, last one. 2x to the 8th plus 31x to the 4th minus 16. So 2x to the 8th plus 31x to the 4th minus 16. Is 8 double 4? Okay, then we can factor it like a quadratic. So I multiply 2 and negative 16 because 2 can't factor out of 31, right? If you can't factor it out, then you can't do that. So what's 2 times negative 16? So I'm looking for the factors of negative 32 that add up to 31. I'm thinking 1 and 32. Which one's negative? The 1, right? So we've got negative 1 and we've got positive 32. These should be x to the what? 4th. But what do I have to remember to divide by? You multiply by the 2, don't forget to divide by the 2. Alright, should I just go ahead and leave it like that? Yeah, might as well. X to the 4th minus 1/2 equals 0. Add the 1/2. And what? Take the 4th root. How many answers are there when you take a 4th root? Why? Because it's even. When you take an even root, there are 2 answers, plus and minus the fourth root of 1/2. We don't have to rationalize that. If you did, you'd have to multiply by 3 more 4th roots of 2 in the denominator and the numerator, and we're just not going to worry about that right now. What's 32 divided by 2? X to the 4th equals negative 16. So then x equals what? Plus and minus the 4th root of negative 16. Is that imaginary? It is imaginary because of the negative, and then someone is telling me it's 2 because 2 to the 4th is 16. Yeah? So if you take the 4th root of both sides, the 4th root of 16 is 2. So plus and minus 2i. Okay? Alright. So at this point, I'll give you the homework, and I'll make sure that you understand which ones you need to... Actually, well, let me just go ahead and talk that out right here. Okay. On the homework, when you get it, it says 1 through 6 are these sum and differences of perfect cubes. Do you see those? We didn't do ones like that today, so you don't have to worry about that. Now, right here on number 5, it says, well, you don't have to worry about it because you're not doing it right now. So you start on 7, and then there's the back, so you just work on those problems, okay? All right.